Is joining me from Washington. Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening.
So you are a grizzled old veteran now.
Almost 2 years in.
Yeah, seriously though, you are actually the number 2 on the delegation because of the way that things are shaking out here in New York. You have the most senior member is, of course, Pete King from Long Island, and you are the number 2 because now the Republicans are in control. What is that going to mean for your district and also for New York?
Well, it means it's no longer The King and I. That was my favorite Broadway play this last cycle. But I think it opens up an opportunity. To my biggest frustration the past 2 years is just the lack of focus on fiscal issues, which I think most Americans, and I can tell you New Yorkers, are concerned about. And I'm hoping with the start of the next Congress that we have a few more friends who are going to be focused on what's more important, not spending all our time on issues like cap and trade that ultimately never went anywhere.
So will you be getting different committee assignments? I know that today there's the leadership vote, and there will be various different things shaking out. What is it that you've got your eye on?
Well, personally, if I'm fortunate enough, I'd love to get on Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over tax issues, trade, health care, primarily Medicare. Those are, I think, going to be the big issues in this next Congress. My background in manufacturing and business prior to coming to Washington, I think, is sorely lacking, and I think I'd be a valuable part of that committee. So I'm trying to press my case. We'll find out in the next few weeks.
Well, actually, that would be quite interesting because, of course, New York used to have the Ways and Means chairman, Charlie Rangel, and he was forced to give that position up due to the ethics scandal. And I want to talk to you about that. But before I do, even though there are as many, maybe, as 7 Republicans now in the New York delegation, depending on how these 2 races shake out, one in New York 25 and the other in New York 1, I'm just curious, most of the bulk of the congressional delegation is still Democratic. So the state has lost considerable clout, arguably, in the switch from Democrats to Republicans in the House. How are you going to be able to combat that?
Well, whoever's in power in this case now in the House, it'll have a Republican majority. But my first day coming to Congress, I've tried to work with my entire New York delegation because, frankly, that's what people care about. They're tired of all the bomb throwing. Trying to push something that will promote economic success is what we should all be focused on. And it doesn't matter if that's Joe Crowley or Pete King that I'm dealing with. Trying to focus on issues that will help New Yorkers should be paramount. So I'm hopeful in this next Congress it is going to get back to what we all care about, is jobs and trying to open up opportunities for people to invest in our economy.
But do you really think that the Republicans are going to be willing to provide for New York, particularly now that we're having a fight over earmarks bans? I mean, will the Republican Party provide for a blue state like New York leading up into a presidential race when it's probably a good bet that a Democrat would carry the state?
Well, I don't really think people look to whether or not how that state has voted. We have put forward an earmark moratorium, which I think is responsible and what most Americans want. What Congress should be doing is trying to enact laws that create an environment for the private sector to invest, period. Taking government funds and doing earmarks for a variety of projects really isn't going to help us on a long-term basis. It should be about setting an environment so that we can compete on a global basis against countries like China or Korea or Germany. We need to have an environment where people want to invest back into this economy, and that's really what Washington should be focused on, enacting that type of legislation. And I'm looking forward to the next Congress. I think there's a much stronger mandate based on what we saw in the House races.
You spoke of working across the aisle in a bipartisan way, but on election night you said we should all be singing the hallelujah that Speaker Nancy Pelosi is gone. I mean, that's not the most bipartisan of statements.
Well, my frustration is with Speaker Pelosi from day one. She had her own personal mandate, her own objectives, and they weren't aligned with what the average American wanted. We spent months upon months debating a bill called Cap and Trade, which was a national energy tax that ultimately went nowhere after it passed the House. Her second favorite project was the health care bill, which literally did nothing to take out tangible costs. I just spoke to an auto dealer today who is just horrified based on the increases that he's seen that he's got to pass along or eat himself with regards to health care increases. But this past Congress, under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi, didn't focus on what people care about. It's jobs and finding an opportunity to take care of your family. And so I'm looking forward to new leadership that'll get back to that. And I think there's many people on both sides of the aisle who do want that. I think we've got a mandate here. And if this past cycle wasn't an election for Republicans, it was a vote against what they saw with the Democratic majority. So we as Republicans now have to put our money where their mouth is and start living by fiscal responsibility and trying to right this ship economically.
But a lot of the people who were elected in this cycle, Republicans who were elected, were Tea Party backed, and there's a very large freshman class coming in. And how much influence do you think that they're going to be able to have on the agenda? And are you not concerned about that going forward? Because, of course, this is, again, a fairly moderate state. I mean, you're talking about a fairly moderate approach. That's not what some of these people are saying when they're coming in.
Well, here in Washington, we're focused on more national issues that will benefit all 50 states. The Tea Party movement is primarily based on fiscal issues, and again, that aligns with what most Americans care about, is enacting legislation that ultimately will grow the private sector and living within our means. This freshman class coming in, part I like the most, much like my background, is the majority of these individuals come from outside the political realm. Americans are tired of professional politicians who have spent their whole career working for the government and have no idea how hard it is living day in and day out in the private sector trying to survive. So I'm excited about bringing some people here who have real-world experience like I do and focus on doing the right thing, which is growing the private sector, not this endless growth of Washington and Albany, which is non-sustainable.
But a number of those people, for example, a couple I can think of right here in New York, were elected or at least campaigned on the idea that they wanted to repeal the health care reform bill. I mean, is that something that you support, and is it going to get anywhere?
Well, in my view, it's going to be awful hard to repeal it. My view is focus should be on defunding the most egregious parts of a bill that's over 2,300 pages long. And that's part of the problem with Washington, these gigantic bills that you have no idea ultimately what's in these and what their ultimate effect is. And I think our goal's got to be is take the few parts that are good, keep them. The majority of that bill is very destructive, and really start to defund those and replace those with ideas on how we can take out tangible costs. And first and foremost, let's start introducing legislation that will help doctors stop having to practice defensive medicine, which truly is the single biggest cost driver that we see year in and year out.
I do want to get back to the issue of Charlie Rangel. Obviously, we saw yesterday that he was found guilty on 11 of the 13 ethics charges that he had faced. And back when he was first charged, and he was called, even some Democrats called for him to resign. At the time, you actually said it was a personal decision for him. What do you think now? Should he resign now that he's been found guilty?
Well, again, the Ethics Committee, we have to see what they come out with regards to. I know they found him guilty in terms of what type of punishment will be put forward. But again, after that, I think it's up to Mr. Rangel to make that decision, whether or not can he still serve the people adequately in New York State. But that ultimately will be up to him. He's served 40 years in Congress. Eventually you have to get to a point when do you say, is enough is enough.
Do you think he's reached that point yet? I mean, to see this, particularly at a time when you're having turnover, it just doesn't look good for the whole House generally.
Well, I can only speak for myself. I think Washington, this place is like Fantasy Island. If you're here too long, you really have a hard time making the right decisions. I think people coming here after spending considerable time in the private sector and then spending a few years in Washington to really invoke real change is what we need. But when you're here 30, 40 years, I think it is very difficult to continue to do what your constituents need.
So you will not be spending 30, 40 years in Washington then, I assume?
I'm already a little too old for that.
You will, however, have to vote on Charlie Rangel, right? The punishment is for a full House vote eventually.
I don't know yet what's going to transpire here, but we will find out hopefully in the next few days.
Well, okay. I want to thank you very much, Congressman, for joining us. Chris Lee, now the second most senior member of our delegation, despite the fact you were just reelected to your second term. Thanks so much.
Thanks.